Welcome to this episode of End of Life Conversations. I'm Reverend Wakil David Matthews.
And I'm the Reverend Mother Ana Luisa Armendariz. In this podcast, we share people's experiences with death and dying, grief and loss, and the end of life.
Every episode, we are so honored and blessed to share stories with amazing, compassionate, and wise guests. So let's get started.
For our conversation today, we are blessed to spend time with Paul Miner. Paul is a transpersonal and spiritual counselor and thanatologist. He spent 7 years in a Jesuit seminary where he had the opportunity to serve as a teacher, spiritual director, and chaplain in county jails. His calling to the Jesuits was inspired by a deep interest in contemplative spirituality, liberation theology, and a passion for social justice.
Soon after he departed the Jesuits in 2017, Paul read and was influenced by authors like Alan Watts, Krishnamurti, Sri Aurobindo, and Pararamsa Yogananda. In May 2020, Paul began his year-and-a-half study and learning how to meditate within the Kriya Yoga tradition. Paul received a master's in East-West psychology with certification in spiritual counseling at the California Institute of Integral Studies, CIIS. After completing his MA in psychology, Paul began his studies in Thanatology, the study of death, dying, and bereavement, with the goal of being a companion for those wishing to cultivate a deeper relationship with death in their lives, especially around grief and death anxiety. Perfect person for us to have on.
Yes. Welcome to our end of life conversations, Paul.
Thank you, Ana Luisa and Wakil. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you.
Well, let's get started. We always have the same question for all of our guests, and we begin with, tell us how death impacts your story.
Yeah, well, I was just having a conversation about this the other day with my parents. They were reminding me of a story when I was about 3 years old at my grandfather's funeral. I was, I guess, a precocious little one and found my way going into the casket. And one of my aunts, who's also my godmother, had to pull me out of it. And I thought that was very interesting that there were some early signs there that I'd be interested in thanatology and death and dying. But more seriously, I would say my godfather, who was a Catholic priest, very inspirational figure in my life in a lot of ways. He had spent time in Recife, Brazil, late 60s, early 70s, and there was a lot of liberation theology going on at that time. The Catholic Church was involved working with the marginalized, the oppressed that was going on, and a lot of conflict was going on because of the United States involvement in Latin American politics. And anyways, long story short, his life was all about working with people from all types of backgrounds, but giving his life to really others, especially those who have been marginalized or othered by society. And at the end of his life, before he passed, he was working on ecology and care for the earth. And he was diagnosed with leukemia in 2009 and passed away within 4 weeks. I had experienced death from other family members, extended family members, but this one really moved me in a deeper way because not only was he 73, he'd lived a significant life, but he still felt called to do more. He'd already done so much. And I've seen there's a website called Caring Bridge. I think it's still around, but where people can send in their thoughts and memories exactly of their loved one. And he was just getting all these messages from people from across the world. And it was fascinating. Remember working in corporate sales at the time in Chicago, and that really moved something within me that I was like, I want to give my life to something greater than myself. And his death really was kind of like the Paschal mystery of Jesus's death bringing new life. I really felt that personally for the first time in my life. So his death really has kind of brought me to where I am today.
That is so beautiful and amazing, and I'm so grateful that you shared that story with us.
Yeah, that's really sweet. That's wonderful. And what is your current role right now? What is the work you're doing?
Yeah, my current work is transpersonal spiritual counselor, as well as a thanatologist. So with my background in psychology, I went to a program that was called East-West psychology. So it's really studying not just modern psychology from a Western perspective, but studying wisdom traditions, spiritual traditions from the East, as well as from North America, the global North, so indigenous tribes within North America, the global South, shamanism out of Peru, the Amazon region. So it's really an eclectic psychology program that is transpersonal. So what that means is that really taking psychology beyond just the ego, the cognitive aspect of our reality, but really the self or the soul, those things that transcend the personal consciousness. It also can involve non-ordinary consciousness. So examples of psychedelics, people have those experiences, near-death experiences, the list goes on, meditation, really a multitude of experiences that people have had, these transcendental experiences. And then with the Thanatology, I bring in grief work. So Thanatology is a study of death, dying, and bereavement, was mentioned. A lot of my coursework is going into the multifaceted aspects of grief. The grief is actually more than just a response to a death. It can include non-death losses. It can include grief around ecological loss and so forth. A lot of things. I'm sure we can get into that later. So that's kind of where I'm bringing in that, and then death anxiety, because I also have a story around death anxiety personally that I've struggled with and found healing through meditation. And so I bring that into my practice with individuals who are experiencing death anxiety.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's really good work. I'm glad you're doing that. And we will post links to your website or whatever you'd like us to post to so that people can get in touch with you and hear more about that. I'd love to hear that story. I don't know when we should do that, but I'd love to hear that story if you want to do that now, and then we could go on to the next thing after that. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
So this was in 2015. I was at the very tail end of my 3 years at St. Louis University. So in the Jesuit formation, it's an 11-year process to become a Jesuit priest. And so I had just finished the second stage, which is called philosophy studies. So you study philosophy and some theology at that stage. And I was in St. Louis and working in North St. Louis in a Jesuit parish, which was in the predominantly Black neighborhood of St. Louis, which is a very segregated city, like most cities in the United States. And I was actually on my last night in St. Louis before I was being assigned to teach in our Jesuit high school in Detroit, Michigan. And I was going to visit my sister and her family across the river, across the Mississippi in Illinois. And as I was driving down the street, turning left into a four-way stop intersection, a car hit me going about 90 miles per hour. I was in a high-speed police chase. The night prior, the drivers were involved in a homicide. So they were fleeing the police. They were going so fast that I didn't even see the car hit me until it was right on me. Miraculously, I spun around quite a few times. The only thing that happened physically was my glasses got knocked off. Didn't have a scratch on my body. No blood, no broken bones, no whiplash, nothing. Somehow, I don't know. But the rear tire wheel, the entire hub and everything connected to it, the undercarriage was ripped out and was like 100 yards away. And the first responders who came on the scene said, yeah, if you had been half second slower turning than that, you'd probably be dead or a vegetable, meaning I'd be in a coma probably, or paraplegic. So was it a very impactful thing? Not in the moment. I remember going and actually still driving in a separate car to my sister's place. I don't know how I did that. But long story short, I go to Detroit, Michigan, and I'm teaching at the high school there. And I started having these experiences of anxiety and around death. It was either my death or the death of my father. He had been going through some medical issues at that time. And so the anxiety I was feeling was in the middle of the night, I would just be awoken out of nowhere. And it would cause me to basically pace the hallways for hours, drink water, sit up in bed. It started impacting my life because, teaching schedule, it's pretty demanding. Early mornings, late evenings, and this anxiety was just eating away at me. I would say on a regular basis, probably 4 nights a week. Again, it varies, but the anxiety was really, again, around my death and my father's death. And usually around an abrupt loss. So like without being able to say goodbye. So there was a lot of fear about not being able to say goodbye or have any closure with family or loved ones. I left the Jesuits around that time and for other reasons. And when I went to California, I started learning how to meditate within the Kriya tradition. And that meditation practice really did help me alleviate my death anxiety I say that anxiety never goes away. I think death anxiety is something that is actually natural, but I think the issue is when it starts affecting one's life, right? Lifestyle. We want to address that, but we also want to like approach it with respect and curiosity because death is sacred and it's a natural part of life. So I don't try to approach it as a way of like we have to get rid of this. This is something bad. I try to like say no. This can actually, in my own experience, it's opened up new life.
Yeah.
It's made me appreciate life more deeply. So
Yeah. That's so wonderful. Good way to look at it. And with any lesson that we get in life, that the hardest ones are the best ones, sometimes are the most important ones. So I really appreciate that respect for and kind of acceptance of what you were going through, and then finding a way to heal it, and then applying that to the work you do. That's really great. And yeah, it's interesting that accident at the time, he's like, well, I got away with that, right?
yeah,
But then months later, you're still
yeah.
your mind, your body is still
Processing.
working on it.
Mhm.
Yeah, really great story. Thank you.
Yes, and Paul, just going back to this death anxiety, how would you characterize death anxiety versus normal everyday anxiety and then like the obsessive compulsive anxiety? Because I feel like there's a couple different kinds of anxieties, right? So how does somebody who's like, I'm really anxious, but what is this death anxiety?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, I don't want to go into the OCD and all that stuff because I'm not qualified to talk about that. But there is a distinction. Yeah, you're right. There is explicitly just anxiety around death. So I have clients who come to me currently right now. I have a handful who just are working with death anxiety. So anxiety around death, we can call it thanatophobia. The interesting thing is, it's not always just with people at end of life. My clients and myself, my own experience, I was in my early 30s, and my clients right now, they're all in kind of the early mid 30s. So this death phobia, this death anxiety, thanatophobia, what do you want to call it? It can be manifested at really any time in life. But yeah, the anxiety itself is really just coming up. People will have like thoughts around the anxiety of like what's the unknown. So a lot of times it's like, I just don't know what's going to come after this. A lot of times it's anxiety around, am I going to get ill? Is there going to be something that's going to cause me to get really sick? Not necessarily the fear of pain. Sometimes that can be it, but it's really just like this sense of loss of control. It can also be manifested in fear of losing others. Or also, if you have kids, what's going to happen to my child? This happens a lot with women who are mothers. It can happen with husbands too, but the mother, kind of the maternal caretaker, especially if she has young children, sometimes that death anxiety can come up. It's like the anxiety around what's going to happen to my child, my children, if I'm not there to take care of them. So yeah, it can be really manifest in a lot of different ways. And those are just a few examples. I don't know if that answers your question or.
Oh no, that's really good for a listener to be able to identify if what they're feeling or sensing in themselves is a death anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, people have anxiety around having conversations about a loved one passing, or like you said, all those examples are very real. And I was just trying to make sure that people understand it is a thing
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay. And,
Yeah.
Paul is here to support.
Yeah.
And on some level, that's our, on a macro level, that's kind of why we're here. I think this death anxiety is really almost cultural in many ways.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a lot because we're just not given those spaces to have these conversations. There's not a space for grieving. There's not a space for holding death in a more nuanced and respectful way. And yeah, it's a lot of cultural influences for sure. And I also will say thanatophobia and like death anxiety at the end of life with someone like with cancer or some terminal illness, that's going to look a little different too versus someone like in their early 30s. So we have to make sure we're paying attention to the context too of one's life and where they're at in their stage with that anxiety.
Yeah. I will say I do hear kids talking about, and I think it's going to be a combination of death anxiety and climate
Mm.
anxiety,
Yes.
because I hear a few times kids in the house have mentioned, I'm really scared of like burning up. Like it's going to get so hot that I don't like, it's so scary to think about how we'll be able to take care of our bodies if the climate is just over the top.
Mm.
And in a way, it's that's definitely more climate anxiety, but it's also a little touch of death anxiety. Like I don't want to die XYZ way, right?
Exactly.
So it's interesting. I'm
Yeah.
gonna hold that little thought for a while.
Yeah, that's the intersectionality of I love that's kind of where I'm really interested is the intersections of that's why I study psychology, thanatology, spirituality. I think because all these things come together and what you're touching on is like yeah, ecological grief and anxiety are real. And I just wrote a paper not too long ago about that. And there's actually a lot of rising anxiety around that. Therapists are seeing a lot of clients coming in, and I think there's a connection between grief and anxiety in some ways.
It's great.
Yeah, I think you made that point early on that grief can come in many, many flavors of loss. Any flavor of loss can come in, which is a loss of a relationship, a loss of a pet, a loss of
Mm.
a job, or any kind of
Yeah,
thing can create that level of grief, and each of those can contribute.
yeah.
And as you said, there's an intersectionality to how they all combine to create who knows what the anxiety level is
Yeah.
or what the anxiety specifically is, but
Hmm.
they can all be helped by the work that you're doing. So that's really good.
Yeah. And I would just say this too is that going off the same topic of ecological grief and anxiety, is that I have a client right now. This not seeing me for ecological grief, but her death anxiety has been really stimulated by some recent deaths in her life. So we've been connecting how death is actually part of the grief. Like the grief is actually kind of in some ways the foundational piece to the anxiety that's kind of stirring up in her life recently. And then also I'll connect this to the youth that Ana Luisa just mentioned, is that I think the anxiety that they're feeling is a lot of times that they haven't had the chance, they don't have the space to grieve it because they're seeing it right unfold in real time, and but there's no place for them to grieve.
Right. And because the grief isn't allowed, because as adults, we'll always tell them it's not going to be that bad and you have to have hope. So it's at
Mm-hmm.
this really, knife's edge difference between forcing hope and allowing grief.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a sensitive place to be and hold space for, especially kids who really don't have enough language and experiences to fully embody this and
Mm-hmm.
share it in a safe place. But yet, I hear my daughter always saying, I'm so sick of everybody talking about hope. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it sucks to be a kid right now. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's real.
Mm. Yes. Yeah.
And here we are.
Yeah. I think that's kind of like the approaching it from a place of sacredness, and that this is a holy thing, and not that it's religious, in the dogmatic sense, using holy more in a, not just even secular, but just universal experience that the spirit and the soul is part of this. And I think that's lacking in a lot of our society. And I understand it because there's a lot of pushback from some of the toxic or negative influences of religion in the past. But I think we've also lost that connection to something greater than ourselves as well. So,
Hmm. I agree, Paul, and thank you for speaking that out. Well, as a launching point for the next question. So, what are your biggest challenges in working in these different arenas around death and dying?
hmm, wow. Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is kind of what we're talking about right now. Is it's kind of like the uphill battle. I feel a lot of times. I feel like I can be on an island. It can be lonely in this field. Thanatology is not a very big field. I mean, there's a lot of chaplains and grief counselors and death doulas. So there's ways to create that community, but it's challenging because of the greater meta culture and narrative around death. So like trying to break through that noise and also just offer a counter narrative that's very different than what most people, it's almost like speaking a different language, I feel like sometimes. And sometimes it's hard to really get people to understand what this approach is, because language, I found like I had to be very careful because like I use spiritual language and psychological language, but like any word comes with connotations, biases, and backgrounds, and so it's hard to not only just have a conversation around this, but then also try to bring in a whole different narrative, like a death positive narrative that's more of a holistic spiritual approach to this work without coming across as like I'm religious or that I'm coming across as too woo woo. So it's hard to find that balance sometimes because we live in a society that doesn't really acknowledge not only death but then these different approaches that I'm bringing in that can be to be more specific, like bringing in yoga and when I say yoga, I'm not talking about the asanas. I'm talking about the philosophy and the spirituality behind it in a Western dominated society. So again, I think that's my biggest challenge is just like the meta kind of challenge of being in a society that's still very death phobic, but also has lost that container for like holding spirituality and sacredness I would say in the Western dominant society. There's obviously little pockets here and there, but it's trying to work with people who aren't in those pockets, trying to reach the people, the majority who might not have access to that or have life experience around the stuff that I'm trying to integrate and bring into the conversation, I guess.
I always laugh because if I tell people I'm a death midwife, it's like such a party pooper kind of thing to say. And
Yeah.
it's like this provincial idea that, I mean, in a way, we're still really superstitious, even though we're like so enlightened here in this country. But the words just scare people. Even uttering the word death makes people kind of like, oh, like, what are you saying? Don't say that here.
Right.
So I understand that. And, I've been in a place where somebody was like, well, are you like Dr. Kevorkian? I'm like, no, I'm not like Dr. Kevorkian. But then they kind of like, it gets bandied around. I'm like, you don't understand.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's also true, and I appreciate the fact that you're talking about how people relate to the word sacred. And so, as you said, all these words have a certain baggage attached to them for people.
Mm-hmm.
So many people have been wounded by the church and religion in various ways. Reclaiming the sacred is really a wonderful work that it sounds like you're doing, and a challenge, I'm sure. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And I would say the other big challenge is going against the grain. Even the word counseling, I use counseling and coaching in my business name, but I don't really identify with either model. But that's the language that is kind of known, so I use it. But people still are in this mindset that, oh, the counselor heals you. I go there, you have the answers. You're going to give it to me, and I'm going to be able to be okay, good as gold. And I'm trying to break that cycle. Is like, no, I'm not the guy sitting on this pedestal like that knows everything. It's really trying to like be a companion. I really like Dr. Alan Wolfowitz's model of companionship within the grief counseling field, so that we're just companions accompanying people on this mysterious journey, because allowing that space for mystery is also a challenge with people.
Yeah.
So like having the rational mind and like, okay, this is what we're going to do. What's the empirical evidence behind this? All this Western, again, I think there's space for that, but I think what I'm trying to do is bring more space for the mystery as well.
I love that. So important.
Paul, you sound like Wakil and myself on our little conversations. We talk about all these same kind of topics.
Yeah, we both do spiritual direction. They call it that, right? But
yeah.
And as you did as well.
Yeah.
And both of us would prefer spiritual companion. And I've actually had that conversation with both my people I work with as a spiritual director and with students that I have in my spiritual practice. And I said, there's no hierarchy here. I come to you in a three-way connection with you and myself and the divine by whatever name, the ancestors or whatever. And together we will perhaps companion each other, as what Ram Dass said, we're walking each other home. We're just going to walk each other home. Let's see how that goes. So I love that. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it totally resonates with both of us, of course. The next question we have is, and this kind of goes to kind of speaking more to yourself. What do you need to feel supported in your work?
I think for me, big part is my spiritual practice of Kriya is big. So the daily practice, being in touch with nature is huge for me. Even if I just get out I live by a park here nearby, and just getting out into the park, being close to trees and walking on the grass. Yeah, just going for a walk. Those things are important, but I would say community is really important too. Like I said earlier, it can be a lonely path. So yeah, I think finding like-minded souls and people to build that community is really important. And then, yeah, you mentioned spiritual directors and spiritual companions, having someone to have as a companion or a director, whatever you want to call it, to, continue to not only challenge myself, but check myself and my work with people, because not being a licensed practitioner, trying to bring credibility to this work is important. Not just credibility, but also integrity. So finding those supportive networks and mentors, elders, people I can continue to learn from and with, I think is critical for me. And friendship.
Well, I hope to be your friend.
Yeah, likewise.
So what frightens you about the end of life?
I think for me is still this idea of not having closure is a big thing that still is a little fearful, is this idea that I won't be able to say goodbye. There's something really important there for me. Even just having 30 minutes to have that closure, whatever it is, just having some sort of conversation with loved ones, it's something that's really important to me. I'm not really afraid of like the afterlife, because I have a very different view on that now than the Christian one that I grew up in. But yeah, I think for me, it's still around this idea of not having closure, having a quick death, or not a death that's unexpected, I should say. It's unexpected, and then yeah, there's, I think also there's fear of the pain, if there is going to be pain, because every death is different. Some, death can be messy. I try not to romanticize it, because I don't know if that really helps, and it also doesn't like give the true picture like of what death is. So for me, yeah, I think those are like the two big things that still kind of frighten me about the end of life. Yeah.
Are there things or ways that would help support you in that fear? Or I do a class called Before You Go, Preparation for End of Life. And one of the parts of that is just writing out a message to your family. And I thought of that as you were talking about not being able to speak to your family. Are there other things you can think of that would help support you in regard to those fears? And you've already talked a little bit about dealing with anxiety, but anything else you can think of?
I really like the Five Wishes document. I think that's something I've looked at. I don't actually have one right now. That's something I've been putting off. And yeah, so that, I think I like it because it's so tangible. It gives you very precise kind of things to make sure you're fulfilling. I think that's a big part of it, is just like being prepared. So that kind of brings up for me is the connection between life and death, that they're not polar opposites, that they are deeply intertwined. So within the yoga tradition, they talk about how a good death is really living a good life, because they are so deeply intertwined. So I think that's a piece for me, is like continuing to examine what is a good life for me. And we all have to ask that individually for ourselves. And there's different philosophers and thinkers, spiritual traditions that can help you on that. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like, and it's always going to be an evolving thing, because we're always in this constant change. We're never static. So I think that is helpful for me. And then, yeah, the journaling, but also like end of life kind of review is something. So even before the end of life, so a lot of people will integrate this in end of life review once they're on their deathbed. But it is a practice that we can actually do every night. So there's actually, within the Ignatian spiritual tradition, Jesuit spirituality, is that you do they call it the examine. It's twice a day, and you kind of just review your day. Where is God? There's like 4 or 5 steps to it. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and you do like in the middle of the day, and you also do it at the end of the night. And I always like that practice, because it's kind of reviewing, where was God operating in my life today, but where did I not really fulfill my obligations, or where did I not fully respond to God's love in my life, is one of like the areas that I focus on. And I think you can kind of apply that to Swami Kriyananda, who was a direct disciple of Yogananda, talked about the nightly hospice. So what he said was that, yeah, it's kind of a nightly review of your life. So it's kind of like the exam, and you're reviewing the day and your life. And also, he says, kind of giving away that day. So like, so you can move on. It's like, that's a death to that day. at night, and then you move into your next day is a new day. It's a new life in a sense. So that nightly hospice work, I'm not always great at that. I try to be more, but to get to your answer is like another area that can be helpful for not just myself, but for others.
Thank you so much for that reminder. I feel like in the last, maybe you told me about this actually when I first talked to you. The what is it? The review, the examiner,
Oh, the examine? Yeah.
the examine. Yes. So I'm like, oh, I forgot I wanted to do that.
Yeah.
That is so beautiful.
Yeah. I think, yeah, these practices can be just so, I mean, it's a very universal thing too, because you don't even have to like, you can change it to fit that. That's what I love about a lot of Jesuit spirituality. It's not like this strictly Catholic dogmatic practice. It's, I mean, it was founded by a mystic. So there's a universal aspect to it.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah, we have a similar practice in Sufism as well. Similar, very similar.
Oh, really?
That we've talked about. I think you and I have talked about it before, Ana Luisa. Sort of the check-in at the end of the night. Yeah,
Yeah, I think we
I
have.
love that. It's perfect. I love that. It's a
Yeah.
very good answer. We'll probably try to find that and
Yes,
include it
it's
in our podcast notes.
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So that actually is kind of also, I think you've spoken to this, but how do you keep yourself resourced to do this work? It sounds like you already do a lot of the support work for it.
Yeah, I mean, I try to stay within my. Something that's really important for me is to stay within my kind of lane, and so I'm really clear. Like the work I'm doing is not mental health counseling. If I'm not addressing the mental health aspect, I mean, in a way, it is. I mean, that could be a whole other conversation, but people aren't really there yet in our society. So I do respect mental health. Like it's obviously an important part, but I think I'll just say mental health for me is much bigger than just the cognitive. And yeah, anyways, I digress. And so for me is like, yeah, the meditation practice is huge. Reading, I need to be careful with my budget from a book budget because it's pretty insane. So yeah, constantly reading new material, either books or academic articles. So Google Scholars, I'm still technically in school. I'll be finishing my capstone for Thanatology this summer. So I still have access to an academic library, but you don't even need that. Google Scholar is pretty great. So there's great articles out there, peer-reviewed research on a lot of the topics I'm interested in. And then, yeah, just getting the training. So, I mean, again, this unfortunately is finances come into the picture. So a lot of these trainings cost money. So I can't do everything I want to do at once, but finding those trainings, those people that are providing the way, the perspective that you want to work with people is really important. So like Alan Wolflett, he's based here in Colorado. He has trainings he provides on his companionship model. Then I'm also really interested in psychedelic end of life care right now, but I just have an academic and personal experience with it. I'm not qualified to work with people. So that's something else is like really important for me is like, okay, if I want to do that work, I want to get the training so that I can do that important work with people end of life that are experiencing death anxiety, using psilocybin and theogens to help not just ease that anxiety, but also can help people in the individuation process. So that, I'm really influenced by Carl Jung's work as well, and that all of this stuff is really about individuation, so like becoming more whole. Well, which is a paradox because from the Eastern perspective, we already are whole. So I hold both of those softly and loosely. Kind of fluid between those. I'm not an analyst nor a yoga therapist. So I don't know. I dance between all these modalities. So it's important for me to respect those, but also be in conversation and learn as much as I can, just bringing in my own stuff and without any, research, I guess, or informed knowledge, which again, that's a whole other conversation we'd have with what is knowledge, but
We'll talk.
Great. Yeah. Very good. Our last question is there anything you wish we had asked you that you haven't had a chance to talk about?
Yeah, end of life dreams and visions. I know this podcast is called End of Life Conversations. So, an area that I'm really interested in working at some point is with people who are end of life, who have these end of life dreams and visions, ELDVs for short. Dr. Christopher Kerr, he's a hospice physician out of New York, Buffalo area. A lot of fascinating research around this with his team, that these end of life dreams and visions that people are having are really an area that I see overlap with Jungian psychology, dream work, active imagination, to help people have these, it's very powerful visions and dreams that are reported as either a deceased or living relative comes to visit them, or a deceased living pet, an animal, one of their pets, companions comes and visits them. They also can have a dream or vision of traveling to some place unknown. Those are kind of the big aspects of these dreams, and they're also they're not delirious because they've been reported to actually have a lot of clarity and give people a sense of comfort, not just for the individuals dying who had the dream or vision, but also the family members who are present. So that's an interesting aspect too, is that these individuals who have had these experiences are reporting that most of them are comforting, but the ones that do cause anxiety actually have led to more wholeness and integration because they then make amends with their loved ones before passing away, which is beautiful that these dreams and visions are creating this opportunity for people to really become more fully integrated and whole before they pass, and have more connection with not just themselves, but what's going to come next, but also a connection with their loved ones before they pass in a very meaningful way.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's very, very important.
Yeah, and Paul, did you notice that the New York Times had this article like 2-3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
I read that whole piece too, so I was already like, oh, I know what
Yeah.
this is.
Yeah.
I'll have to look for that.
Yeah, and there are natural experiences that happen. If you study different cultures, it happens everywhere. So I know in the yoga tradition, like the apparitions people have, like when someone passes away, like they'll come visit them. In that society, or that culture tradition, it's much more respected and not like dismissed. Like that's just hallucination.
Yeah, it's just so funny. And I've said this before on this podcast, but my sister, who passed away a few years ago, seems very present in our house and with us. I have so many stories now; they just kind of keep kind of coming, and it's hard to discuss this with anybody because it always seems like you're just a little wackadoo lady. But I believe this. I believe all these things. There's so many more aspects of this embodiment that we're having that you can't tell me there are no more mysteries. It's just implausible.
Right.
So yeah, let's go play. I want to go talk to apparitions
Yeah.
and open space for people who've had them. So
Absolutely.
I think it's the saying as a credit to Pierre de Chardin, who was a Jesuit priest, mystic, scientist as well. Interesting dude. His writings got suppressed by the church. Typical Jesuit.
Surprise.
Yeah,
mhm.
yeah,
I know. Wasn't he shipped to Japan or something too? Like he got booted
right.
out of
Yeah.
France.
I don't know if this, I mean, it gets attributed to him quite a bit. I haven't actually come across him saying it outright, but we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. I think that's kind of what this conversation is getting at to at this moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. Well, that's the end of our questions, and I really appreciate everything, Paul, that you brought. It's been a great conversation. Yeah, we'll let you know, of course, when it gets published. And
Mm-hmm. Have you guys read this book? Yeah, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, Rituals of Renewal and the Sacred Work of Grief by Francis Weller. He's based out of Northern California, just a lot of workshops around grief. And he's kind of trained in the Jungian circles as well, but brings in, a lot of interesting.
I've read other things by him, and yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he writes very poetically, which I like.
yeah, yeah,
I feel like he's a kindred spirit.
yeah.
So I'll just read a little brief passage from this, if you don't mind. This is just from his first chapter, titled An Apprenticeship with Sorrow. I see this work as soul activism, a form of deep resistance to the disconnected way in which our society has conditioned us to live. Grief is subversive, undermining our society's quiet agreement that we will behave and be in control of our emotions. It is an act of protest that declares our refusal to live numb and small. There is something feral about grief, something essentially outside the ordained and sanctioned behaviors of our culture. Because of that, grief is necessary to the vitality of the soul. Contrary to our fears, grief is suffused with life force. It is riddled with energy, an acknowledgement of the erotic coupling with another soul, whether human, animal, plant, or ecosystem. It is not a state of deadness or emotional flatness. Grief is alive, wild, untamed. It cannot be domesticated. It resists the demands to remain passive and still. We move in jangled, unsettled, and riotous ways when grief takes hold of us. It is truly an emotion that rises from soul. Right? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that grief is feral. I'm like,
Yeah.
I know this and I love this.
It's another book to add to the pile I've got the same problem. Got to watch your book budget.
I've got the same problem.
And I like to read stuff that's just lets me relax too. So it's like,
for sure.
I kind of go back and forth. So anyway, well, thank you again. It's been a really, really important and just really wonderful conversation. We really appreciate all the work you're doing, and any way we can be of support to you in the future, please keep in touch. And you got a neighbor now.
You're right. I know. We got to connect. So for sure. Yes.
We'll talk.
Yeah. Thank you so much, both. And likewise, love the work you guys are doing. And these conversations are so important. So thank you again for having me on.
Thanks so much for joining us on the End of Life Conversations. We appreciate you and look forward to sharing our stories. Thanks to my daughter Lucero and Nico Rush, who have cheerfully assisted us as our editors and tech support. Additional resources, transcript of this episode, and links to our social media will be in the podcast notes.
Yeah, thank you so much. And please subscribe, tell your friends, follow us on social media, and consider supporting us through Patreon. We want to acknowledge that the music we are using was composed and produced by Charles Heastand.